2 weeks. Recording.
All right, I forgot to hit the record button. We
It's
normally record
okay.
the meeting.
So I've been trying to come up with a template to basically allow people to share as much information as they can about a taxonomy and put a link to it. I thought this could be a data set under the data science working group. And in terms of the projects itself, Dom, I was rereading the project classifications, and I think it's basically a sub project of it because it supports that, in that I basically use taxonomies for project classifications. So my two primary use cases I'm starting with for this particular presentation and orientation are just categorizing different types of open source projects, which is really hard. And so I'd like to, again, just share what I've done so that doesn't, so someone else, when they have the same problem, has something to reference, and just sort of see what happens and see if anyone else wants to contribute to it or not. And it's sort of an experiment. So I'm curious what this group thinks, if they have any reactions or feedback. And then I have a template that I'd like to propose.
I like the idea. I don't have any specific comments because we kind of talked about it. But yeah, I mean, I think the data science working group's a good place for this. We certainly spend a lot of time thinking about how to deal with open source project data, and a big part of that is how we think about them, is the taxonomies that we use. I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts. Kind of looking at Georg because I know that you do a lot of this with the work that you guys do on Grimoire Lab.
What I'm wondering is whether we can come up with one taxonomy. That'll be an interesting challenge because depending on the focus that someone takes, there are very different categories that projects are put into.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a fun exercise to go through and see if we can create something that others find also useful, that is generalizable.
I would love to have one taxonomy because I don't have to make it again. I think, and what I'll share when I actually start writing this up is that I've started creating like taxonomy hierarchies. And it's all basically, if you look at sort of older industry level ones from somewhere like Dun and Bradstreet, this technology industry is basically like software or like IT or development tools. And it's like those are huge groups of things now, that in theory and in any sort of research analysis, we have to imagine that a project that's a language is going to behave differently than a project that's infrastructure or tooling or automation tools or CI/CD. Like we know intrinsically that the things themselves are different, and there might be some differences in behavior as a result of that in terms of how they're used and how they're worked on and how they develop. But we don't have standard ways to do that. And so I've seen some categorizations from industry analyst firms, but they tend to be more high level. And so I've tried to create sort of hierarchical tag systems. And essentially, like, I think having that as a potential outcome would be amazing, Georg. I don't know if it's possible, but I think other people besides myself have tried it. And so I guess for my like other goal is to basically find out who those, like, what you've already done. Because I think a lot of creating a standard version of this is seeing prior art and seeing what we can learn from all of it and put it into one generic thing. Um, so that is sort of like my underlying goal, is to never have to do this again if we can find someone who's, one, already done it, or two, combine all the prior efforts into something that's better.
Yeah, on that note, I think one of the really good things here, because you're like putting wheels together to make a bicycle or a car, depending on how many we get. And for this, if we could get some overlapping taxonomies, overlapping in terms of the projects they cover, you can just create a comparative metadata, right? So it's not necessarily making a decision between them. This would be super difficult to do, for example, if you're trying to taxonomize a functional or Lispy language, because things get real weird real quick there. But if you did a, like, literally call it a compositive or comparative metadata analysis, then you can keep and preserve the way that it's labeled across taxonomies, and have it searchable by the composite. So they can still search or find by, right, CICD and then another metadata adjective. And it saves a lot of time because it doesn't require reordering the hierarchy. It just keeps it all at the same parallel analysis.
Yeah.
Which
So that's my other sneaky part of this. So you didn't spill my beans, but I just shared what I'm working on as a possible template. I also just stuck in my questions for CHAOSS reviewers in here too, just to have it all in one place. But as part of the proposed template, I am asking people to sort of suggest their own tags, which I might make more prescriptive as this progresses. But that way we can start to organize these submissions by whatever tagging hierarchy is starting to come forth. Like it is going to be like kind of build it as they come. But that is kind of the goal, is that we would get some data about the metadata in terms of what we're able to collect in what I'm calling essentially like an adapted data card. If you're familiar with the data card formats that are used for public data sets, I was just looking at those types of formats and templates as inspiration for what we would want to include, because this is essentially a data card of a data card in terms of the metadata about data tagging. And so I proposed something, I put it in the link. I would love eyes on it if you are interested or want to give feedback on it. This is basically what I would have in the data set submission, which I would either have as you submit a PR, or we could set it up as a form. I just don't love that idea because I would probably default to Google Forms, which is not an open source tool, versus just doing everything as sort of like text entry in GitHub, which is a little bit messier. But I think that could be more accessible to the broader audience that doesn't want to use any sort of proprietary tool, because being presented at another audiences, that can be more uncomfortable for some. So, Georg.
What would you think about taking, I don't know, the next 5 minutes to do a test run? And I was thinking maybe we can take an existing taxonomy like repostatus.org, which I think has some use out there, and then try to fill out this template for repostatus.org.
Ooh, so the repo status looks like a set of tags for repos. Is that the appropriate interpretation?
Yeah.
That's like a 2-second overview. Okay.
So this is one type of taxonomy that just comes to mind when we talk about how do we label repositories.
Mm-hmm. I'm open to that. Don, I want to default to you and say, how do you want to use your meeting time before we follow the rabbit hole down, which could take a while?
Let's tell you what, let's hold on the activity, and then at the end, if we have time, let's go ahead and do it. I think also the other option, I mean, we could put together like a template, like an issue template or something,
Mm-hmm.
or I don't know, like a PR template or something that might help with filling out some of the data and getting it into the repository. We could think about
Okay.
that.
So if it's a pull request template, and if I create it as a subfolder in the data set folder, then we could add to it by pull requests. And so the submission format is a pull request. I don't mind that, because I think that's in line with using GitHub as the primary tool. And then also, as long as the submission type is predominantly plain text or links, then everything should still be, because ideally I want it to be copy pasteable. So that, again, like, it can be reused, which is why I have the preamble in there that please only include non-sensitive public data. And I will as one of the like primary requirements for accepting a pull request, it can't contain sensitive data. I'm just going to draw that line because I don't want this to go off the rails. And so I don't think it's going to be that much of a problem for something like taxonomies, but you got to say it, you got to watch it.
No,
And
fair enough.
so that was my caveat. And the last part that I can talk to a number of other people too about it is just, does it, I'm assuming because it's under CHAOSS, we're getting the default CHAOSS license, or do we have to specify a license type for this?
It would be under the MIT license because that's what everything CHAOSS is under,
Okay.
which
I think that's fine.
the lawyers tell me is kind of can cover documents and data and as well as code.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've only used Creative Commons for data publishing, but I haven't really seen a consistent license type for data. And this is again like kind of a weird thing. So I would just default to the CHAOSS project and not do anything weird.
Okay.
So I'm fine with that. I just didn't want to put anything explicitly in here before I asked.
Yeah, and that's what the data science license is. So
Okay.
the repo itself has the MIT license in it. And I won't check this here live, but I'm pretty sure you have write access to the repository. So if you wanted to start kind of working on where you want to put it in the, kind of in the data set framework, if you wanted to experiment a little bit with pull request templates to see how that would work. I've never used a pull request template for something exactly like this. But we could try it out and see if it works. And
Yeah.
nothing says that people have to use the template. They could always, do it some other way. If they've got something really complicated that doesn't really fit with the template, they can always just do a one-off.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate the time in this meeting, and it sounds like from those of you that chimed in, this is an interesting idea to test. Again, it could totally fail, but I think we again in CHAOSS have talked about, or specifically the Unified Working Group, if we can be an effective tool to crowdsource different kinds of data, and so this is just one way where we'll test it, and we'll see if it goes anywhere, and I'll keep you posted. I think we have one more meeting before FOSDEM, so hopefully by then I'll have everything sketched out in the repo, and we can take a look at it to make sure it passes a small test and no one's uncomfortable with it. And then I'll just follow up and let you know how it goes. We'll see how the reception is in a public audience, and we'll see how the experiment runs. Thanks all.
Sounds good. We're all about experimenting with stuff in the CHAOSS project, so I'm a big supporter of that. Try it, see if it works. Okay, any other questions on the taxonomy stuff for Sophia? Okay. Relicensing and forks project. If anyone else is interested in getting involved, please let me know. There is in the I'll just drop this in here in the README for the case study. There is, a Google Doc that we need to work on. There's some stuff that we need to do, and so there's some things that people can work on if you're interested in that particular project. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that because I think that we talked about it in the last meeting in December. And the really interesting bit is Chan's action item. So she was lovely about putting together the agenda for me and getting everything ready for the meeting, but she's in Peru, which sounds more amazing than being here in the UK. So she is not able to make it, but she, as you know from the December meeting, she had started pulling together some of the other metrics which are important. So the stuff that I had done was focused on organizational diversity, which is important, but we need to look at all the other stuff too. And so she had started doing that. So she's continuing to work on that, and will come back to us in the meeting on the 28th to talk more about what she's learned.
Yeah, this 100% piques my interest. So I'm happy to jump in on engage on this. But generally, when you're just jumping in, especially for this project design, should I edit directly on the doc or provide a comment? How do we make sure to observe the change on a Google Doc?
Yeah, I would do it as suggested edits for now. Or, if you add like a big chunk of something, if you just want to leave a comment that you added it for someone to review, I think that would be probably probably good either way. Awesome. Yeah, because the Google Doc for the report, frankly, is really, it has some stuff up at the top about kind of the style and some guidelines, but most of it's not been written. But a lot of it has been written in the OFA paper. So because that's all Creative Commons as well. So we can just copy and paste stuff from that paper. I just haven't done it yet. Because I'd welcome some help on that. Cool. Anything else? Okay, so the other thing that I worked on shortly before the break was, or probably during the break actually, was better defining some of the data science projects to make them easier for people to work on because, and this came out of two different conversations that I had. One was with the CHAOSS Africa researchers. So I talked to Sean, and she had a desire to get the CHAOSS Africa research group working together on some sort of data science project, but they weren't sure where to get started. And my impression is that some of them are a little newer to open source and newer to doing research and using it as a learning opportunity. So I wanted to document the project. The other place that this came out of was a conversation that Kevin Lombard and I had at the Linux Foundation Member Summit, because over the summer he's a professor in he's in Nebraska, but he's not at the University of Omaha. He's at the other university, which I'm drawing a blank on, and he is getting some data
Creighton.
science. Thank you.
Sure.
So that's what he is, and he's getting some data science students in the summer, and he thinks he's going to have some funding to have them work on some projects. So my idea is, and we haven't decided which one goes to which group, but to give one of these projects to Kevin's data science students to work on and give the other one to the CHAOSS Africa researchers. And we can also start defining some of the other project ideas we have. But both of these project planning documents look pretty similar. So there's kind of a project overview where I've drafted some research questions or hypotheses, depending on the project, based on some of the things that I had been thinking about. That doesn't look right. I'm going to go back in the history. I think there was a question there. It's got some kind of scope to keep it sort of narrow for the first phase, thinking that these projects can start with a smaller scoped phase and see where the research takes them, and then build out and do future phases of the research based on what they've learned from this first phase. So I put together some basic criteria and then put together some steps that I think probably need to happen in the workflow of this project. So, there's a setup step, there's some things that you need to do, like finalize the research questions. There's a data set generation phase in both of these projects, and some, thinking on what that might be. A literature review section. Now, the idea is not for these to be academic publications, but for them to be more like the LF research reports. But we still need to do some looking at the relevant literature and citing that in the reports. We need to pick some metrics. We need to come up with a plan for how we're going to collect the data from those metrics. And then we actually have to collect the data. There's some analysis, some report writing, and then taking it and going future phases. So this is what both of these kind of look like. And some of the individual steps are more specific to the actual project. So this is around archival of open source projects, which personally I think is pretty interesting. Like what do some of those have in common? What can we predict the likelihood that something might get archived based on, I don't know, activity or some other criteria? And then there's this one. Like I said, I'm gonna go back because that should have a question there. But this is more like the corporate projects that just get shut down, like the projects that didn't have decreasing activity? What did maybe they have in common? So I think there's some really interesting stuff here in this one. And likewise for the corporate projects moving to foundations. I think that there's some interesting stuff around that, and we can look at some of the project health metrics from before when it was at the company, and then what changes when a project goes into a foundation, if anything. And so I think that will be another thing that will be interesting to look at. And then, again, I've picked sort of a arbitrary scope and criteria that we can change later, but I think it might help get people started. And then it basically has a lot of the same steps. Like I said, some of the individual stuff in here is a little bit different. This one has a sample generation because the amount of data would be quite large. But that's kind of what these look like. So I'm going to talk to Kevin. I'm going to talk to San from the CHAOSS Africa researchers groups and see if they have a preference for which one they work on. And then I think we'll need to work with these groups to kind of help them and maybe mentor them through doing some of this research. And like I said, we can take, we've got in the working group, we have issues that are project proposals. So we have other proposals that we can take and we can do similar definitions around. I mostly started with these two so that we could get people working on them and get a sense for how well this works as a definition. And maybe I suspect there are some gaps, some additional information that people need that we probably need to build out. So I would love any feedback on these two project planning documents, particularly from those of you who've been in more of an academic environment and have a better feel for what students and people who are newer to doing this type of research, what they might need. So I'd love any feedback on these documents as well. Any questions?
My only question on this originally was just for even the phase 1 scope. Why are we just choosing 10 projects from each foundation? And Sophia, sorry, I didn't see your hand.
That was a bit arbitrary. It doesn't necessarily need to be that. My thinking behind it was that it would make the data more manageable. Maybe we don't need a sample. I mean, maybe we can look at all of them. I think, yeah, I don't know. I'm not necessarily tied to doing it as a sample. It seemed to me that might make it the data more manageable for newer researchers. And then a phase 2 could be expanding it to all of the projects within those foundations. But if we think it would be better just to do all the projects, then we can scrap the idea of doing a sample. Sophia.
I guess just a general question. I'm assuming we're not opposed to this eventually potentially becoming an academic publication. Like it doesn't.
No, absolutely not opposed to that. My thinking was that as the CHAOSS project, it would be nice to publish some just sort of standard Linux Foundation-y type research reports that are really accessible to the practitioners in our OSPO working group and some of the traditional audiences that we have within the CHAOSS project, community managers, OSPOs, some of the more corporate types. What I actually hope, especially with, if you're looking at like data science students, maybe a few of them will take some of these ideas and this research and build on it and build it into some more academic research. So it's the same thing with the forks and relicensing, right? We started that as I want to do kind of an LF research style thing. And then I got sucked into doing an OFA paper because it was part of the presentation. So I did that, and then after talking to Matt a little bit, we decided that it did have some legs, and so we're taking the research, just the organizational participation bit of it, and we're turning it into a paper that we're still trying to decide what publication to send it to. But so we're taking some of that research and turning it into an academic academic article. But the goal is not to start with that, like to start with something that's a little more accessible to everybody. And then if some of those people want to take it and make it into like some academic research, like I would expect that Kevin would want to do that with whatever work that some of his data science students are doing, because, professor, published papers, tenure, it's a whole thing. So I would
Yeah,
expect
yeah.
the people that are working on it can do whatever they want with it, right?
That's what I figured. I'm wondering if we should have any sort of like expectation guidance on that. I mean, similar as you're talking about with Kevin, like we have the context in our meetings. But if you are new to this, there's like no clarity on what people like what we're trying to get out of it or what they're trying to get out of it. And basically the expectation is do what we want. We're just interested to see what you find. And I would say the other thing that I would add if we do have some sort of like how to engage with this is I assume our group would be available for check-ins. Like if they're halfway through this analysis and want to bring it to this is a group that will ask questions, that will needle, that will to Sal's point, like some of the scope things may or may not make sense depending on how the analysis progresses. But if you're newer to this, then you might not necessarily know that. Whereas you could bring your questions to this group and we can have feedback, we can have more questions. So I assume Kevin will encourage that, but just so he's not doing this all alone, I think if they're doing projects from the data science working group, the data science working group is happy to ask questions about projects. Generally, we're happy to ask questions about most things. So I think like this is an open audience for review and feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to see this be a more collaborative effort where they're bringing it in regularly for check-ins and feedback and just to let us know what they're finding so far. I think this group would be interested in the findings as well. And I will take it to do to maybe better define kind of what we're trying to get out of it, because from a chaos perspective, what we're trying to get is just some recognition for the CHAOSS project itself and the fact that we're doing some of this research. And if you look at like the Harvard Census, for example, the research report that the LF has published jointly with Harvard, like that, it gets cited in a lot of different places, even though it's not necessarily an academic publication. It's an LF research publication. So we'd like to see more stuff like that, just to get people more aware of what the possibilities are from the CHAOSS project. So it's partially visibility. It's partially, this kind of stuff is interesting to the people who care about CHAOSS. So I think that's kind of what we're trying to get out of that, but I don't think we've really specified that anywhere. So I'll give myself a to-do to work on that. Maybe I'll get your feedback on it. So I'll probably just do it as a PR as part of the kind of publications section of the repo. Sean, sorry, you've had your hand up for a while. Go for it.
I was just going to echo that I think the research questions that are outlined in that document are that I think is the jumping off point for it to move from a blog post to an academic paper, from a white paper to an academic paper. I don't think that those would change at all.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So it really just becomes a more rigorous expression of what you find to make it an
Yeah,
academic
and you can
paper.
think of these, I think that's a really good way to frame it. You can think of these as like white papers, kind of research reports. But yeah, I'll take a look at that and work on that and get some feedback from people. Anything else on the projects? Okay. We have a couple of reminders. So State of OpenCon is February 4th and 5th in London. So it's a nice opportunity to take the Eurostar from FOSDEM from Brussels and go to State of OpenCon. CHAOSScon is, I should have ordered these differently, January 30th in Brussels right before FOSDEM. So CHAOSScon, FOSDEM, State of OpenCon. We've got like a little 1 week of nonstop conferencing is what that is. I also just wanted to remind people that the Open Source Summit North America, CFP, is open and it is due February 17th. which sounds like it's a long way away because it's a whole month, but with all of the FOSDEM State of OpenCon stuff happening in the middle of it, for some of us, that's not a lot of time to prepare. So think about what you want to submit for Open Source Summit. And then also the next data science working group is January 28th. Also happy Lunar New Year around that time as well. Okay, so we have 12 minutes since the meetings end at 10 till the hour. So do we want to come back? Is that enough time to come back to that taxonomy question and whether or not we can fit the repo status stuff into the taxonomy, or maybe just talk about how we might do that?
I think it's worth a try unless someone has another topic they want to bring up. I don't want to limit other agenda items and hog the majority of the meeting. So if anyone else has something they want to bring to this group, let us know.
I think that probably has dual value between both the taxonomy and the like license change. So I'd be interested in just listening and hearing more as I think.
Any other items? I know, Callie, you're super busy. I don't know if you have any updates on any of the stuff that you've been working on.
Yeah, I've got nothing. I've been running all over the place, getting ready to leave the country for a month.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, if I don't talk to you before then, enjoy your holiday and I'll see you at FOSDEM.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's cycle back. The repo status, taxonomy, how do you want to, I'll just let you drive that, Sophia. I'll stop talking.
Sure. So I sent the template.
This one?
Yeah. So we can see if it's even possible to fill this out. So I like that example. Thank you, Georg. So if you could have that open, I don't know if we can have that open along with repo status, but I'm just going to make a quick copy just so I don't lose the original. And then I'm going to put it below test case repo status.org. So I guess we'll just try to fill it out. I guess you can come off mute and just shout things out. I assume title would be repostatus.org.
I was trying to figure out a way to show them both at the same time, and I'm failing to do that. I can just, here, I'm going to stop sharing for just a second, and then
Looks like there is a maintainer associated with it. Given that everything is on GitHub, I was going to assume the authors should be primarily GitHub handles, because that way then it doesn't necessarily ask for more personal information about individuals. So I was going to default to that, but if they, like, I assume you have to have one if you make it, but if you're submitting something that's not yours, then it would just be GitHub handle or other.
okay, can people see both of these? And I've sort of minimized all the extraneous things that you weren't supposed to, but
Can you scroll down to the test case? Because then we're doing proposed template and I'm just filling it out in real time.
yep, there we go.
So does anyone else have a reaction on authors? Because again, I don't want to make this like uncomfortable for anyone. GitHub handle seems like the most low-key thing to ask for. If it's basically like, who do we ask questions to?
Yep, makes sense to me. I would prefer an email address, but I understand that unless it's provided here on the README, we shouldn't dig for it.
Yeah.
And the GitHub profile is like a resume for some. Otherwise, I would use LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I think
yeah.
especially if we end up doing this as like a PR template, I think that the GitHub handle is probably the way to go.
Yep.
You just have to note that the author isn't always the submitter.
Yeah, that's true.
So I guess the submitter would be collected by the PR. So I'm going to add that. In this case, that would be me. I don't actually see an affiliation associated with this.
The taxonomy itself, I don't think has an affiliation.
So it would just be NA. I think is acceptable.
I think so.
One sentence description, tagging taxonomy for GitHub repositories.
Just for the metadata, instead of NA, can we just say unknown and then perhaps recover that information if needed?
Yeah, unknown is better. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay, that can be part of the description. So if it's unknown, write unknown. That's true. That is a better field to deal with. Do you think that the description and the brief description of purpose at this point seem a little bit redundant right now? To say that that would just be repeating myself.
I would only have one description. I know that people really struggle when you give them two things to describe, and a lot of times they just copy and paste the one line description and put it in the longer description and then elaborate on it.
So
I know I see this a lot in CFP forums where they have like a short abstract, long abstract, mostly the same stuff in both.
Okay, so then I'll just have a little bit more lead-ins and allow for a little bit more text. And that way we don't have to do all of this. Combine. Okay. Yep.
The description I like to have for databases, yes, the why, but also describe the type or types used. I don't know if that level is going to be interesting here, but probably
The
would.
types of data.
Yes, yeah. So in this case, they're looking at repo status, so repository status indicator.
So I have that here, and I could bump that up. I had that as a separate thing, which was data source type.
Nice.
So in this case, that would be repo status. That's also going to be a very flexible thing. But I do agree having that as separate of the description of the thing and the description of the thing that it's describing. The suggested tags, ideally, this is the part where I don't know how well templates will work. As people write them in, it'll show you a drop down of what people have wrote before. That would be the like ideal format. Status, because right now I don't really have a lot to say beyond repository and status for tagging.
For the tagging, can they choose? Well, yeah, I guess this would be important. Can they choose more than one tag?
I would say unlimited tags.
Okay, yeah.
It's just more, that was the question of I'd love them to be able to see what other tags have already been used. So that if they see one, they write the same one versus like it eventually having it as a drop down, but the ability to keep adding them. And that's something that I'll play around with the GitHub template and see if it will do that for me. I don't know if it's that smart.
Yeah. The only thing that will do is induce cognitive priming for the late players, but you can play with that a little bit by like re-randomizing it so that they're not at least seeing it in the same list field or the same field. But yeah, we might just want to be careful about cognitive design if they're allowed to put free inputs.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Do you think I should limit the number of tags then?
I don't think so. I think if we see, I mean, I don't think we're gonna see 16 tags. But if we do, I think the ability to observe anomalous events is just as interesting.
That's fair. All right, so we'll leave it open and see what happens. And then I think also like if this gets a lot of activity, that's something I can disclose in a separate like this is the top tags that are being used kind of thing to show how it's shaping. So here's another redundant one. Data source type and data source description. These could be the same or one.
Yeah, it's not clear how they are different. I think one is if you are fueling or if you are automatically assigning the taxonomy, what data are you considering?
Yeah. I guess the thing that I'm struggling with when I originally wrote it, I was thinking like I have a taxonomy I wrote for survey. So the data type would be survey data, but then the data source description would be a survey of project maintainers. Like it would have a little bit more detail, but I see how that's kind of it is a little bit redundant in nature. So we could possibly combine those two things.
If I understand that, wouldn't that just mean that you have two different data types in your analysis? Or are we only allowing for one?
I mean, there could be more than one data type. That's true. So then maybe I just leave it as one. And then it's just, I guess the thing that I'm struggling with is how much the form itself can be used to generate metadata versus longer descriptions that have to be parsed into metadata. Because then I would see that and say like GitHub, repo, status as all separate tags associated with it. Or in this case, like survey, maintainer, project type. So I think it could be parsed later. So I'm trying to figure out how to get all the data we need as well as the format of the data itself. And I think that's a tricky thing. So I'll noodle on that, but I think that's a possibly redundant. And I think doing another example might help to clarify whether or not that's necessary. Generic links to public resources that use it. I love that it has a website. I think that's perfect. People could list other repos that have it as well. Do I see a license?
The GitHub repo has a license, but you see it also at the bottom, yeah?
Yep, I see it. Creative Commons. And then I see the taxonomy. We're at time. Thank you so much for supporting this project. Again, I'll let you know how it goes and if this becomes anything. And then maybe, I don't know, maybe we'll try it with something else.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is really interesting, and we'll figure out how to gather the data and incorporate it into the repo. So we can chat about that in the Slack channel in between now and then.
Yeah, and I might start just monkeying around in the project. And if I do hopefully I don't think I'll break anything as long as it's my own thing. But please prevent me from breaking anything.
Well, you can do it as pull requests, and I can have a look, and then we can merge them. How's that?
You can't merge anything on GitHub. You just don't merge it. Life is beautiful.
Yep. And if you do, you can generally pretty easily revert things that you've screwed up, because I've certainly done enough of that.
Yeah. The nice thing is there's nothing running off of this repository, so it's just
exactly. It's not. There's no production system on top of it.
And our main branch is protected, right?
Probably not. No.
Might be worth activating.
It's like the number one. It's like, okay, it's in the top three predictors of security concerns for vulnerability inductions, which is not for this project, but maybe we should get you an OpenSSF badge.
All right, I will look at the repo and maybe improve some things and maybe stop merging my own PRs now that we have a few more people involved because I do love that too.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna Excel
Literally
print.
just put the merchant in, so like one person exterior to use, you don't get a Jekyll and Hyde problem. Like if you cannot trust the main maintainer, that's literally why we do it. Yes, please.
Yeah. All right, I'll get better. I'll be better. I promise. Okay, now I'm gonna end this meeting before I can say anything else that's gonna get me in trouble.
thanks everyone.
Thanks, everybody. This is a great
Bye.
meeting. Bye, everybody.